Ching, 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 ching. We've got the money man, Gary Sasse, on. Batting second is NCAA basketball coach Mike Martin from Brown University, who's going to come on, talk about the big dance, URI, PC, the money behind the big dance, and how much big business this is. I know that our productivity here has gone down dramatically, of course, today because everybody's filling out their brackets. And then third up is Saul Kaplan from Business Innovation Factory, and he's going to come in and we're going to talk about the economy in Rhode Island as well. So I'd like to first welcome on Gary Sasse, the money man. Gary? He's here. He has papers, he has numbers, he has folders, and he has coffee.
Coffee's the key thing.
The coffee is the key thing. Great to see you.
Nice to be here.
So you ready for the big storm?
If we get it, yeah.
Yeah. And what impact will it have on the state budget?
Well, I don't know how much of the snow budget they've spent. But,
Not much this year. They
and
can't complain.
No, I think the state's done a very good job this year in managing the snow. I was out, the snow that came but didn't land on the highways, but they had the highways pretty well treated, so they did well.
We'll give them an A for this winter. Let's talk. Let's start in Washington D.C. We got a couple big issues that are really sucking the oxygen right now. One is the federal budget, and to it is Obamacare and its repeal and replacement. Talk about the federal budget. Any updates since we talked last about it? You know, where are we going with this budget?
No, and there really are no new updates. Trump administration's very interesting. They announce things and then it takes a while to follow up. But where we're going with the budget's pretty clear. We're going to have less spending on discretionary domestic programs. We're going to have more spending on military and defense programs. Going to be a lot of back and forth and trade-off between those two. And I think the big issue, if we can get past Obamacare and the replacement of Obamacare, the long-needed replacement, of Obamacare, is there'll be a tax program.
Yeah.
And there'll be a lot of negotiations on the tax program, but that's what will define the budget.
So just staying on the budget for 1 second, will the Rhode Island delegation, Jack Reed, Sheldon Whitehouse, David Cicilline, Jim Langevin, are they players at all in this budget?
Not that I could see. I never underestimate Senator Reed.
Yeah.
Reed's very knowledgeable on defense. But our congressional delegation and our junior senator, you could mark him absent.
It's a different world than it used to be. You know, Rhode Island has always had a history of sort of having stacked up some seniority in key places. I mean, probably the height of it was Chafee, Pell, St. Germain, because he was chair of one of the most important committees on that, especially on the House side at that time. And then also Claudine Schneider, who was sort of this influential moderate Republican who could play in all different areas, and also being a leading woman. Is that a mistake? I mean, you've played at all levels. You played at the state level. The federal level. Is that a mistake that you put all your all your eggs in one party basket, regardless of the ideology? I don't care if we were in Kansas. Is it just a little bit dangerous never to have somebody who can kind of walk?
Well, particularly in this day and age, and for a couple of reasons. The last ring of hell in Dante's Inferno is being in the minority in Congress.
Yeah, especially on the House side.
On the House
side. As a freshman.
And it's unfortunate because the system has become much more partisan, much more polarized. So if you're a minority, particularly on the House side, you don't have a whole lot to do except cut ribbons and make announcements and criticize the other side.
Right.
And we have a congressman that tweets now, so that's what we're up down to. And so it's difficult. I wish that there was more conversation across the aisle, and so there would be room for good ideas from people from the minority party, because that will flip someday.
Yeah.
So that's the unfortunate part. But to be respected by your members, particularly if you're in the minority, you have to be discreet. And everything that the majority does is not bad. Every motive is not to be impinged. And I think our congressmen, particularly Cicilline and Sheldon Whitehouse, hurt themselves because there's always a knee-jerk reaction to what the other side does. They could well be right or wrong on certain issues, but this doesn't make it easy to be a player up there.
I want to say about a year or so ago, Kate Nagel had found the Lugar Center at Georgetown does an analysis of who's the most partisan members of Congress, and we broke it down and took a look at those numbers, and unfortunately, I think for the most part, Rhode Island had amongst the most partisan delegation. I think we were either first or second, if my memory holds to it, and as you mentioned, especially David Cicilline was almost the most partisan member, Republican or Democrat, in Congress.
Give a great example. Yeah, Congressman Cicilline a few years ago had an idea that was, I thought, a very worthwhile idea on manufacturing extension, manufacturing demonstration projects. You would think that the congressman that was involved with an idea would get some of the bacon.
Right.
You know, he'd got the grease. He didn't get much bacon on that at all. And that's an example. So when you do have good ideas, you have to learn how to work along. And it's much harder now. I can sit here in Providence, Rhode Island, 700 miles away from Washington, and say, we need to be more bipartisan. We're not. Obamacare. Good way to segue into Obamacare. Not one Republican vote.
Right.
As Paul Ryan and the leadership try to replace Obamacare, it doesn't look like there'll be one Democrat vote.
Right.
And that's when you're dealing with big issues like that. The majority party has to govern, and the Republican Party is now the governing party in this country at every level of government. But you still need to take into consideration some of the views of the minority. It becomes much, much more difficult if the minority just takes a gun out and tries to shoot you before you get to the OK corral, which is what's happening right now.
So let's talk about Obamacare. Obviously, Republicans have offered a first version, and it sounds like it's a first version. It was to roll out on the table, and this replacement does not seem to be wildly embraced by any. This is not Trump care, and it's not Ryan care. Nobody's putting their name on it, and conservative Republicans may be as angry as anybody else about the construct that's being proposed. Give the 101 on what's being proposed.
So you think Ryan hit the sweet spot?
Yeah,
being proposed by the extreme left and the extreme right. Well, basically, it does two things when you cut away all the other talk. It tries to strengthen individual markets. It tries to give the customer, the patient, more choice. It does so by getting away from subsidies, getting away from exchanges, using refundable tax credits so people can have access to the market, get rid of the mandates, get rid of the whole set of taxes. It really says that the states and the consumer should have much more say on the insurance they're buying. So it tries to strengthen individual markets. The second thing it does is it tries to change Medicaid into a block grant. And without getting into the weeds, for several decades in this country, the Medicaid program has been an entitlement program. Mm-hmm. The state puts up money, and the federal government matches. Rhode Island's match has always been between 50 and 52%. But you really the rules are set by the Medicaid administration. We fought, got a waiver during the Kachuri administration because we wanted flexibility. And what the Republicans have come along and said, no, let's give the community states a block grant, because the states know more about the health needs of their citizens, particularly their needy citizens, than some bureaucrats sitting in Washington. So as opposed to an open-ended entitlement program that the state matches, it's a block grant. And the block grant has two aspects to it. The first aspect is to determine the per capita amount you give each state. This would start in 2020 for reasons I'll get into. And then the second issue that has to be negotiated is, because there's medical inflation, how much growth should you have? Well, there are some people, particularly on the Democrat side, that don't like block grants because they don't want to do anything to close down how Medicaid. Limit Medicaid. People that look at it from a more fiscally conservative position say, no, a block grant can work if you have a reasonable base and you allow for reasonable growth in exchange for the flexibility. The flexibility is the key. And that's going to be a major fight, and it becomes a complicated issue because prior to Obamacare, the Medicaid program was primarily for the disabled, low-income pregnant women and their children. What the Obamacare said is states could expand their Medicaid programs to adults up to, if adults' income was less than 138% of poverty, and about 30 states expanded. So they're very concerned that it becomes block granted. Will they, people on those
will there be,
come back, and 20 states have not expanded. There are some Republican governors, Governor Kasich in Ohio, whose campaign I worked in for a while. He's very concerned about a block grant because Ohio expanded the coverage. And so we really need to see the details.
What would be, just a quick note, first blush, what would be the impact on Rhode Island?
I don't know, and
Yeah.
I think what I get concerned about is we get all the people in state government, all the people that represent special medical interests, and they say that, the sky is falling.
Right.
Well, there are a couple of things we have to find out that we don't know yet, and we'll break it down to two groups. In the individual market, the people that bought their insurance through the exchange,
Sure.
about 30,000 people. How is this going to change their behavior? If young people can get cheaper insurance and not pay for older people, if there are no mandates, will these people go out that didn't buy insurance and buy insurance? Will they buy
Yeah, I
less?
mean, young folks not mandated will not buy insurance.
Well, that's what we have to find out, because if it's affordable insurance, they might.
Yeah, they won't.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
And the second group is how many of the 70,000 people that took the expanded Medicaid program will stay, and there's no good estimates that I've seen, because if you get the block grant and you have flexibility, you may change some of your delivery systems, but doesn't necessarily mean people will lose their
Yeah.
Medicaid insurance. Now, where the Republican right is opposed to the Republican center is they don't want any
Right.
any subsidies, because there is the switch off is this: in lieu of subsidies, which the Obamacare gives people, the Republican plan are tax credits.
So let me ask you a question, though. We saw Obama functionally, he passed one massive piece of legislation, maybe two, with the Recovery Act, but he used almost all his political goodwill over 8 years to pass Obamacare, and then really had no other major pieces of legislation. Is Trump falling into the same trap?
That's really a good question, and there are some analysts who say that if Trump and the Republicans are unsuccessful on replacing Obamacare, they will be in that trap.
Yeah, how are you going to do tax reform? How are you going to do infrastructure? How are you going to do, the other party smells blood.
Right, so that has to be watched very carefully. They made the strategic decision that they wanted to tackle health first.
Why not infrastructure?
Well,
Why not go after, and for two reasons, I ask. One is, A, don't get caught in the trap, and nothing disastrous is going to happen in the next 7 seconds. The second is, the infrastructure is that one bill that seems to have support across party lines, and if you're a president, as Trump says he is, that's about jobs, what's better than get an early start on creating jobs?
There are three reasons why.
Okay.
The first reason they felt they had to deal with Obamacare first was there's $600 billion of tax revenue.
Yeah.
So if you're going to fund infrastructure or fund the budget,
Yeah.
and tax reform is a principal part of the budget, then you got to make a decision on what happens to that $600 million, which
Right.
the Republicans pretty much have cut out. They've cut out most of the Obama tax. That's the first reason. The second reason, the infrastructure is not as easy as it appears, because there's a viewpoint that I think President Trump expressed during the campaign that will pay for it in private-public partnerships.
Yeah, right.
I'm not sure where the private partnerships come in, where the
Right.
public partnerships come in. And the third reason, which no one likes to admit, but I think we have enough history, is if you want to use it for a stimulus, you want to get things going, we're the shovel-ready projects.
Yeah, shovel-ready is not exactly a truism, is it?
No, but it's shovel-ready if we fix up healthcare, because
Yeah.
people are going to walk in the hospital the next day.
Yeah.
It's shovel-ready, we talked about this last time, if you go ahead and spend money on defense,
Yeah.
because Raytheon or Electric Boat will have those lines up pretty
Sure.
quick. That'd be welders
Right.
trained and hired, or whoever the technicians where they need. And so that's the issue. And I think what the judgment is that we had to get through Obamacare, we had to get through a budget, and then we can get to infrastructure.
You're sure they're not being held hostage by the tire and shock absorber industry, who are opposed to any major improvement to America's road system?
I hope not. I'm not that cynical.
It just from a standpoint of that, it's the only perceivable common ground of getting, billions, if not trillions. They're talking now trillions, right?
Definitely trades.
Yeah.
Well, that's common ground. There could be common ground on some of the tax issues. Everyone agrees, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, that we have to do something to make our corporate tax structure
Yeah.
more competitive. It's not internationally, it's not competitive. So there's room there. Where their difference is is how much of the relief comes to the top and
Yeah.
how much in the middle. And that's a really important issue. One of the criticisms of the Ryan plan and Obamacare was Obama put about almost a 4% tax on capital gains for people making above $200,000.
Right.
And about another almost 1% on regular income for people over $200,000 to pay for Obamacare.
Right.
Well, the Republicans took that away, and now they're being criticized for helping giving tax break to the rich. And it depends on where you start or where you sit.
Yeah, right.
Those taxes would have paid for Obamacare.
Yeah, right.
They weren't, necessarily for tax equity kinds of considerations. So it's complicated, and those issues have to be.
So I was up early this morning. The financial shows, Morning Joe, were all about, and this seems the most perverse possible thing, that the country was awaiting the Congressional Budget Office numbers, right?
Yes.
This is the level of minutia we are now at, that most Americans will now even know what the CBO is, let alone.
Well, I love it.
It's right.
Well, no,
right. For numbers geeks like yourself, this must be like Christmas,
well,
right? You're finally treated with
Yeah.
the utmost respect that the entire country
Yeah.
is thinking about your thought process.
Bring back our slavery.
Yes.
But no, the CBO basically is nonpartisan.
Correct.
It doesn't make Democrat or Republican forecasts. Its forecasts are always right. They messed up on some of their Obama forecasts, but it wasn't driven by political or partisan reasons. And so they're going to come out, with a projection. Now, those projections are as good as the assumptions. The point I mentioned earlier, they may say X number of people lose insurance if you go to the Republican plan, but how do they take into behavioral changes because versus individual patient-centered markets versus government-centered market? But you need a referee. You need somebody to do the scoring, and then
What the numbers say?
I haven't seen them. They haven't come out yet. Well, I'm guessing the numbers are not going to be good because the assumptions and the methodology they've used. And they have to deal with hard questions. What does insurance mean?
Right.
If I buy health insurance policy and it only gives me 10 cents on the dollar for my illness, is that insurance?
Right.
So is it 60 cents? Is it 65? There's some very difficult assumptions that have to be made. And the CBO is one of the cases, where at least Congress will get a nonpartisan view, and on tax legislation and on legislation affecting the deficit, somebody has to score it. The whole system was, the budget committee staff score it, but those weren't very.
All right, we're leaving the hellhole of Washington D.C. We're taking the Acela up the Route 95 corridor. Jobs numbers, Len Ladaro's going to take on the new jobs numbers. Where we at our lowest point?
Well, I think a couple of numbers because,
Sure.
This governor goes out screaming that the job numbers are great. So there are a lot of different ways to look at it. One way to look at it is the number of actual jobs that have been created in Rhode Island.
Actual number of jobs would seem to be the number that would matter.
Well, that's the estimate.
And then how much people get paid.
Yeah.
It's a combination of the two.
That's establishment employment in the state. And in the 2 years that the governor has been here, we've grown about 10,000 jobs, which in a practical sense, if you started out with a base of 485,000 jobs when you became governor, we have about 492,000. Those 9,000 jobs are like, 1.9% over 2 years. So that's there, and we're kind of mirroring and parroting what's happening with the national economy. The national economy is better. Let me just make the second point. The second point is, I think what Len was talking about were labor force numbers.
Yeah.
And since 2006, we've lost about 24,000. Our labor force has shrunk by about 24,000 people. And since Gina's been governor, it's continued to shrink.
So is that happening in our peer states? Is that happening in Massachusetts?
I don't have that data with me, but what this is telling us is that we have a flat population. Population's getting older. We're having less people in the working age 20 to 65 group, and if you have a shrinking labor force, you can't have an economic recovery. You could build all the office buildings you want.
Right.
You can give all your friends tax breaks, but we have to deal with the fundamentals. And I think what the URI economist is talking about is that we're losing labor force. The labor force right now is about 550,000 people, and that's people who live in Rhode Island, they could work in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, anywhere. Today the labor force is about 550,000. When Gina came in, it was about 555,000. So, with all these investments, with all this cheerleading and promotion, we're losing our labor force.
Right.
And that's the issue. So economists look at two things. They look at establishment employment. And yes, there's been some modest growth in establishment employment. We've grown about 9,000 jobs in 2 years, but our labor pool keeps on shrinking. Skill quality keeps on going down.
Okay, so last question. How do we reverse that? What's the spark?
Well, there are two things. It's not what Commissar Rhode Island is necessarily doing. It's making structural change.
Yeah.
Making Rhode Island the place where we make the most productive use of the resources, the people, the natural resources, the capital that we have. And that's structural change. It's taxes, it's regulations,
education,
it's education, failing schools. I mean, it's like playing football. There's, if you want your tailback to score, somebody's going to have to throw a block, unless this guy's unbelievable. And so we need to get back to the basic, blocking of taxes, of regulation, of failing schools, of choice. And unless, and strong vocational system, and unless you make those kinds of decisions, you can stimulate, you get some cranes in the sky, but when the cranes leave, not sure who's in the office buildings.
Yeah, right. I want to thank you. You're a former Division I top-level athlete.
Yeah.
And do you have a prediction for the Final Four national champion?
No, my Florida State Seminoles are in it, so it's a strong rooting interest.
And your Bryant Bulldogs did not make it this year.
That was disappointing. Mount St. Mary's from the NEC, made it, and I think they're in a play-in game. Brian was there a couple of years ago. We'll be back soon.
Yeah, they're young. They're super talented. We could see them in the future. Gary, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
The Money Man.